Falcon's Rest is a bar and grill on Old Route 7. It is located where 3 counties intersect and is slightly outside the city limits. Rest, as it is known, is sometimes called a bar for cops because a significant number of customers are representatives of law enforcement agencies. As a place for a secret meeting, it would be last on most people's list, which puts it at the top of my list. I parked in the well-filled lot and headed towards the main entrance. As befits a cop bar, Rest is better equipped than most, with a large open bar area lined with tables for seating. On the last Friday of the month, there were a lot of visitors here, but there was no big crowd. The situation was ideal for my meeting with Sergeant Devin Cross. There were enough witnesses here that the meeting did not seem secret. Upon entering, I was met with hostile looks from most of the visitors. I expected nothing less because the lawyer was suspected of murdering his unfaithful wife and her lover, a police detective. Of course, there was no verdict or indictment. It is difficult to do anything without evidence. The bodies were not found, and the lover's car disappeared along with the lovebirds. Nevertheless, I was considered guilty. The couple disappeared without a trace. I had a motive, and I was a seedy lawyer. Who needs evidence outside the courtroom? Devin arrived and didn't look too pleased with my choice of meeting place. He was a tall, well-built black man. He could be called a man of honor. He is here to repay a debt and thereby cleanse his soul of the guilt he bore for being indebted to a man of my reputation. I will be frank and say that I am what is called a dishonest or hardened lawyer who does not pretend to have the slightest moral character. I'm an unwitting accomplice in half a dozen organized crime cases. The day he walked into my office with a thick stack of foreclosure papers, poor Devin was going through a truly difficult time. Then Metropolitan Police Officer Devin Cross was the victim of predatory mortgage scam lenders, and in those early days of 2008, he and his wife and 4 children were to become just another sad, homeless man. He went through all the honest and quasi-honest lawyers without receiving any significant help. He turned to me out of pure desperation. To tell the truth, I don't know why I helped him. There was nothing special about it for me. He was an honest cop and a good man, loyal to his friends, but not someone I could take advantage of. He couldn't pay. Being honest, he told me about it right away. Internet scammers took his last dollars. The foreclosure was issued the next day. He just sat in my office, a big, physically strong man, with tears in his eyes, and talked about his daughter, his little princess. She had cancer, and he didn't know how to tell her and her brothers that they were about to lose their home. To stop the sale, I filed for bankruptcy, then asked some of my less scrupulous clients to visit a mortgage broker and get an admission that the documents used in the foreclosure were fraudulent. In other words, a mortgage fraudster, faced with 2 even more brutal criminals, was telling the truth for once. Then all it took was a bribe to the court, more than Deutsche Bank was willing to pay, to at least once achieve real justice. Why did I do all this? I still don't get it, but Devin Cross had a hard time living with the knowledge that his family's home had been saved by a scammer like me. "You chose a strange place for the meeting," he said. "Even a guy like me has a conscience. I couldn't let you get into trouble by helping me. And that's why you chose this place?" he asked as Lottie, the barmaid, approached. She was dressed as usual, in a tight top that did not cover her stomach, and trousers that looked like they were painted on. She was a very beautiful girl who was not afraid to show off her assets. "What can I offer you, Bruce?" she asked me. She and I had a long relationship consisting of harmless flattery and excessive advice on my part. She had a small son and no man at home, and she made the mistake of choosing sex appeal over reliability. I saw Lottie tense. Everyone said I was guilty. Accordingly, I must be guilty, and therefore anyone associated with me will suffer. However, I noticed that Lottie came to the table when she could have had someone else serve me. Lottie was a good friend. As it turned out, I had more people like her than I thought. I didn't want them to get hurt because of their loyalty. I needed to do something to get my life back and reassure people that they could relax around me. In turn, Devin Cross gave me a lifeline, but I needed more. "Bring us 2 Boston beers, Lottie," I said. "I must admit that you have courage, counselor. Go to a place where Paul Marino's friends and work buddies were gathered. Devin said. Paul Moreno is the same bastard who seduced my wife and got me into shit. On the night of March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, he, his Ford GT, and my wife disappeared, and the night before storms alternated, flooding 3 counties around Schoharie Creek. In any western state, this body of water would be called a river, but here it was mistakenly called a stream. This tempting name led to great suffering. People stubbornly continued to bridge and build around this treacherous but modestly named watercourse. Schoharie's misjudgment paid a heavy price in lives and property. By the beginning of March 18th, all emergency teams were busy rescuing people stranded by the flood. For several days, no one noticed that my wife and her asshole lover were missing. Then, of course, suspicion immediately fell on me. The city takes courage, as they say, I told Devin, and we chatted about nothing while he prepared for what he came for. I waited for 2 beers and then said, "Just say what you want, and I'll do the rest myself. Trust me, and no one will ever believe that the tip came from you." Then he leaned over and whispered, "There is a warrant, and on Sunday at 6 in the morning, they will raid your home and office." I pushed the chair and jumped up so that he fell, and then shouted, "Listen, when I need advice, I won't ask some pig from the subway about it, and she would be a better friend than you. I repeat for the last time, I don't know what happened to my wife." I ran out, leaving behind a rather confused Devin, but he was a smart guy and realized that everyone would believe the worst about him. He'll be seen as an ambitious cop looking to get ahead by exploiting our relationship. My confession would be a feather in any cop's cap. Trying to extract a confession from me would not have harmed him, but the fact that he was seen with me at a secret meeting would have ruined him. In this case, everything was so public that no one would believe that he warned me. As I walked out of Falcon Rest, I sighed. I alone am to blame for the fact that everything has reached such a deplorable state. I let my heart get the better of my head. Now I have to work my ass off to get out of the mess that we call justice in this country. Still, the words from my late wife's diary haunted me. They were a swarm of killer bees, stinging my heart until all the blood was drained. In the diary of Elena Gray, Mrs. Bruce Gray, the entry for the 1st of October read, "Today, I saw him again. He is very tall and handsome, with wavy black hair. Jenny says she knows him. In fact, she slept with him. He's a police officer, which means he's keeping an eye on me for something to do with Bruce. It's hard to believe that such an ordinary person as Bruce could arouse such suspicion in others, but I think it has to do with the fact that he is a lawyer for such high-profile criminals. After all, the people he deals with are much more interesting than poor Bruce. Don't get me wrong, I love him very much. He is a teddy bear, the kind of man you feel safe with, and why people think he's dangerous, I'll never know. Jenny says the cop watching me is very talented. His name is Paul Moreno. Jenny had been dating him for the past 6 months. Her husband Bob is a clone of my Bruce, except he has a boring real estate practice instead of some black hat criminal lawyer. You can't blame Jenny for giving in to the police officer's persuasion. After all, the temptation is so great. After 7 years of marriage and 2 children, she's looking for a little thrill, or so she says. After 15 years of marriage with a 14-year-old daughter, I'm ready for a rocking chair on the back porch. Women like me simply don't attract the attention of young guys. This makes me feel so old. October 15th. Bruce is away again. I swear this man is moving out of town more and more often. If it had been anyone else, I would have suspected infidelity, but this man is as faithful as a spaniel, and almost as exciting. Today, I signed up for the gym. Jenny persuaded me. She's into fitness and needs a partner. I'm not in such bad shape, not like Bruce suffering from a midlife crisis, but Jenny needs a partner and I could use some physical tone. I increased my morning run from 1 to 2 miles, but I need to work on my stomach and butt. I feel empty nest anxiety. Maybe getting in shape will help. And why did I let my 14-year-old girl talk me into sending her to this boarding school? I swear, Rachel is just like my mother, all feminine ambitions, no concern for others. My mom still makes fun of my career choice, but I believe that helping others is the highest calling that anyone can aspire to. Being a social worker can often be frustrating, but on those rare days when you realize you have helped someone else change their life, there is no greater reward. On the other hand, Rachel may be trying to avoid the stigma of Bruce's profession. People say such cruel things. A teenage girl can be very sensitive. It might be better for everyone if Rachel leaves, but the mother can't help but miss her child. I saw him again today. God, how beautiful he is. He was at my gym. What a stud he is. He was wearing such a tight suit. You could see the sculpt of his abdominal muscles, but I tried not to look at the bulge in his shorts. It can't be all about her. Why he keeps following me, I will never know. But Paul Moreno is certainly easy on the eyes. 17th of October. Today I saw Paul Moreno at the gym again. He caught me looking at him, but all he did was hold eye contact until I was forced to look away. Jenny says he must be interested in me, but I can't figure out why unless it has something to do with Bruce. I took a glass of wine, then leaned my back against the head of the bed. I tried to give free rein to my imagination, but it kept coming back to Paul, his hard, muscular body and enormous dignity. I tried not to think about him. It seemed so disloyal to Bruce. But this is just a harmless fantasy. There's nothing wrong with fantasies, right? 2nd of November. Today I went to vote, but it doesn't matter. As I left the polling station, I saw Paul again. He didn't try to hide, hasn't followed me for a while, but has been back in the last few days. He even said hello to me. I stopped and spoke to him. "Are you back to spying on me again?" I asked. "Well, that's my job and my excuse." "An excuse? What would you say if I were just following you? Why do you need this? Have you looked in the mirror lately? Oh, wait, I am the mother of a teenager. That doesn't stop you from being a sexy mother who gets all the young guys." "Stop, I'm an old woman." "Yes, you, unfortunately, are a mother, but not old, just sexually mature." Then I saw an acquaintance and interrupted the conversation. I can't believe he's flirting with me like that. Of course, after visiting the gym, I lost 5 kilograms and tightened my butt. But still, such a young, hot guy was interested in me. It is certainly worth continuing in the hall. At first, I was intimidated by all these young girls with their strong bodies. But if I find a personal trainer and work out, it will pay off. Bruce noticed, of course. 24 roses just arrived. When I called and asked why, he simply said he wanted to send them to his beautiful wife. What can you say about such a man? I love him so much. I may be flirting with a handsome young man, but I will not betray my loving husband. "Jake," I said as soon as he picked up the phone. "God, do you know what time it is, counselor? I've been calling you since about 9. "I was at work," Jake Trumbull answered. "Well, I have a new job for you." "Can't she wait?" "No, the highest urgency." "So what?" "By sunrise on Sunday, I need a 100% black bedspread in my residence and office." "This Sunday?" "Yes, exactly this. It requires at least 72 hours. And you give me at best 24. "Sorry, I was just informed that I need it." "Well, it will cost you well." "How many?" 35, Jake said. "After all the business I gave you? This is a special price. For anyone else, it would be 50. Jake didn't say that it was unlikely that I would survive sending him any more business. Moreover, at the moment, whether he was a business partner or not, I was in no position to bargain. He could have given me any price, and I would have had to pay. "Okay, just do it," I said. 9th of November. I've seen Paul 3 times in the last week. Now he always smiles and waves at me. Jenny had a full-blown affair with this man. She says he is the best she's ever had in bed. He is 29, 8 years younger than me. I asked her if he was worth risking my marriage for, and she told me to ask the question again after I tried it. Last night I attacked Bruce when he came home. I think there are some benefits to our daughter being away from home. Bruce did great, but I'm ashamed to admit that all this time I was thinking about Paul. Am I so depraved that I need to think about another man while my husband is making beautiful love to me? Today, as I was sitting at Starbucks, sipping my mocha latte, Paul came and sat at my table. For a long time, he sat silently and looked at me, while I studiously ignored him, but finally he broke the silence. "I was transferred to another position," he said. "What? I'm not officially following you anymore. What does it mean? Well, among other things, this means that my superiors have decided that no matter what crimes your husband committed, you were not involved in anything illegal, he said. Then he reached across the table to cover mine with his and said, but it also means that now I can tell you how much I like you. I wish we could get to know each other better. You know I'm married, so what does it mean to get to know me better? He reached out his other hand and took mine between his. This means that you, a beautiful woman, are married to a man who is not able to satisfy you. You deserve to experience love the way it should be between a man and a woman. What about Jenny? I heard that everything is fine with you. What Jenny and I had was purely sexual. She is not satisfied sexually in her marriage, but I am looking for something more. Besides, you can't believe that any man would choose Jenny over you, he said with a smile. As I already said, I am married. I have never cheated on my husband. Can he say the same thing? You saw my husband. What do you think? I think we both know you deserve better. With that, I stood up, leaving most of my latte unfinished. I needed to get out of there. This man had such an influence on me that I felt uneasy. December 1st. I hadn't seen Paul since he ran into me in the cafe, and I began to fear, and at the same time take comfort in the fact that we might not see each other again. I regretted it. His attention was amazing to my ego, and I had to admit that I desired him on a purely physical level. Moreover, I have never been with any man other than my husband. I admit I was curious to know what another man would be like, especially one so gifted and such a skilled lover. After work, I walked to my car in the Department of Human Services parking lot. I was more than a little late, delayed by paperwork. The area was well lit, but empty. When I walked to the car, I had a clear feeling that someone was watching me. I leaned over to open the door, and suddenly he was next to me. I jumped back in fear. Paul, you almost scared me to death. Are you stalking me now? Sorry, he said, groping my waist under my open coat with his hand. I just had to see you. I am always thinking about you. I guess I should have been scared, but the thing is, he was on my mind almost constantly. I wanted to see him again. Please, I begged, leave me alone. I can't do this to my husband. In response, he just leaned over and kissed me. He was so big and tall, so courageous and strong. He overwhelmed my senses, and as in romantic cliches, I felt electricity in his kiss. Some kind of spark jumped between us. I need you, he said, more than all the women I have ever known. If it were just me, I would leave you alone, but I feel your body calling me. I couldn't help myself and kissed him back, but then I pushed him away, jumping into the car with the words, I can't, and I would like to, but I can't. They didn't bother to knock. At dawn on Sunday morning, 4 officers dressed as stormtroopers picked the door lock and forced their way into my house. I think they assumed they would find me asleep. I was up in the kitchen preparing what the travel brochures call a full English breakfast. Of course, I substituted smoked fish for the salmon, but I found a specialty store that sold kidney pie. I was just scrambling eggs in a large frying pan when the first stormtrooper burst into the kitchen. I hope you like scrambled eggs, I said, but he grabbed me and pushed me out of the house. I was kept in a police van while my house was torn apart. They did the obvious. They tore up the carpeting and dug up the flower beds. I was glad I chose mostly wood floors. They lifted a few boards, but left the upper floors mostly untouched. The basement was destroyed. What I didn't like the most was that they broke into the trunk of my car. It seemed like pure malice, as I had left the keys in the ignition, but destruction seemed to be the order of the day. For all that, they weren't that bad. After the destruction of my home stopped, several officers with whom I had become friendly over the years invited me to lunch at Denny's. Where are you taking the dead bodies, Bruce? They asked, as I ate what the menu called a big breakfast, which turned out to be a decided disappointment after the meal I had planned. As far as I can tell, there are no corpses. Come on, they disappeared in March. It's October now. Do you think it will rain today? It was very dry after those spring and summer storms. With my flower beds gone, I'll have to replant the bulbs if I want flowers this spring. But still, I'm better off than all those people around Schoharie Creek, I said, referring to the flood at the creek. My interlocutors at Denny's paid no attention to the flood victims or the flowers. They were only interested in one thing. They desperately wanted my confession because ultimately they had virtually no evidence. The problem was that I knew that this condition could change as quickly as a flooded stream. If I were you, I wouldn't expect to see spring flowers, but it will be easier for you if you help us. We know you had a good reason for what you did. Maybe you've just lost your head. Stop being a lawyer for once and become a man. Take responsibility and we can help you. No, I don't think it will rain. It looks like there will be a drought after the rain. I'll stop by Lowe's for some light bulbs. Okay, have it your way, lawyer. But in this state, cop killers get fried. You should think about this carefully. 9th of December, I had a hell of a day. We got a call early. 5 children need protection. I don't usually work for Child Protective Services. However, we are currently in a busy season and time of year when we are short-staffed. With a bad flu season and people needing time off for the holidays, we had to be flexible. However, 5 children under the age of 7 needing emergency care is a bad day. All of them were injured. They had just seen their mother beaten almost to death by the man they called father. He was only a blood relative to 2, but still, he was the one they relied on for protection, and he betrayed them. I didn't want to separate them or put them in a county center for Christmas, but what could be done? Around noon, I found a couple in their 60s who had raised their own children and were still in excellent physical shape. Both were recent retirees suffering from a loss of purpose in their lives. The wife was a nurse and the husband was a traffic engineer. By 4 o'clock, we had temporarily placed the children and created a support system for the new foster parents. I was feeling pretty good when the state police called and said they were unhappy with the placement of the children. It was the same old nonsense you always get from the state. The welfare of children is not as important as whatever interpretation of the rules they decide to accept as truth. Can you believe they were concerned about paying for childcare to people in the state pension system? This can be considered double payment, said the woman from the staff. For an hour, we beat around the bush on this issue. The matter reached the head of the district administration and the state DSS commissioner. At that moment, when I already thought that the matter would not work out, I received a call from potential adoptive parents. When will the children arrive? The woman asked. We have everything ready. Both my daughters are here to help. Well, you see, the state is worried that payments for foster children will not be allowed because you receive a state pension, I said. What was said next was said in genuine anger. Well, tell that asshole governor to keep his lousy payments. Just send these kids to us. When the county executive heard this, she laughed and said, Okay, send the children. Then we can always sue the state for this money. It took me another 3 hours to get the children to their new foster home and get them settled there. When I was able to go home, it was already almost 8, and I arrived there around 9. The first thing I did was take a hot shower. I was wondering if I should call Bruce. Sometimes when I call him, we can talk for hours, but other times he is clearly pressed for time. I got the impression that his clients can be quite demanding. Usually I try to wait for his call, but today I just needed to tell someone about my day. I was wearing a terry robe and was just about to call Bruce when the doorbell rang. I pulled my robe tighter and headed towards the door. I opened it on a chain. Paul stood there looking so cute and a little guilty. Can I come in? He asked. I don't think that's a good idea, I replied. I know that your husband left the city again. You're all alone. All I ask is that you stop by and chat, maybe have a cup of coffee and talk. I can't, I said. You can trust me, he said. It's not you I don't trust. For yourself. Please give me a few minuties. I don't know why, but I let him in. She made us coffee and sat down with him on the opposite end of our large sofa from him. Sitting, I lowered the hem of my robe. It was a loose garment, but too short to be comfortable in such a situation. Relax, he said. I'm not here to take advantage of you. I'm here as a friend. I heard you had a hell of a day. Yes, I answered, and we continued to discuss my day, and this relaxed me. I told myself that there was nothing wrong with two acquaintances sitting and drinking. We actually switched from coffee to wine and had frozen pizza for dinner. It was probably already close to midnight when he said what he probably came for. Elaine, I will always be your friend, but you should know that I feel a passion for you that I can only call love. At these words, I shuddered nervously. Please, he said, let me finish. Now your husband is in New York, where he meets with representatives of organized crime and their personal anti-surveillance expert. They plan how to defeat the government's wiretapping program. These are evil people, and he helps them escape justice. Stop it. I won't listen to this. This is unfair. Bruce isn't here to defend himself. You are very faithful, but is it fair to you to be associated with such a person? By following and loving you, I have learned what a wonderful and caring woman you are. Your life is about helping others. You are a saint who married the devil, but I want you to know that I will always be there for you, no matter what. As the evening progressed, we moved closer and closer to each other on the couch as we talked. Before I knew it, his hand slid into my robe and we started kissing. I knew it was wrong. But as his hands caressed my naked flesh and his lips pressed against mine, I knew I couldn't hold back. We both knew where this was going, but it was like a freight train that didn't want to stop. I was helpless, and then I heard the phone ringing. He must have been calling for quite some time. Suddenly, this fact seemed to click, as did who was calling. Bruce, I said, breaking away from Paul's grip. Bruce was on the phone. Just checking, he said. Sorry, I probably woke you up. I lost track of time. I pulled myself together to answer and try to speak normally. Bruce was in a talkative mood and went on and on. As Bruce spoke, I saw Paul on the couch growing increasingly impatient. Finally, Paul smiled sadly at me and quietly left. Bruce's call saved me from irreparably damaging my marriage. But did I want to be saved? Paul's touch still burned me. He made me feel a passion that no man had ever aroused in me. The DA's conference room had a bleak, last-century look, as if it had not changed a bit in the last 20 years, which in all likelihood it had. Chloe Marshall was the daughter of a former state senator, a man who avoided prosecution and retired with enough power to get his daughter into the DA's office. From the DA's point of view, she was no better or worse than the rest of the miserable people, oppressed, poor, and defenseless, and complaining that the rich could hire lawyers. "Where is your gun, Mr. Gray?" she asked. "We didn't find him while searching your house." "Gun?" I asked. "Smith & Wesson. 44. Magnum registered to you." "Has he disappeared? You know that, yes." "Sorry, I'm hearing this for the first time. It was kept in the top drawer of my bedroom nightstand. Is he really missing? Everything will go easier if we are honest with each other," she said. "Okay, begin. What evidence did your officers allegedly recover from my house?" "Everything has its time," she said. "Well, then I will answer your questions in due time," I said, standing up. "In that case," she said, handing me a notice of my right to appear before a grand jury. The real purpose of the meeting was this notification. I had no intention of coming here. The conclusion is obvious. I should be charged with 2 counts of murder. In truth, the DA had no choice. They broke into my wife's desk and took her diary. They knew the whole sad story of her betrayal. Of course, in the minds of women like Chloe, it reads as a love story with a tragic ending. My opinion was somewhat different. As for the table, it was a shame. It was a narrow little desk, an antique from the late colonial period. It stood in the cellar's window for almost a year. We were newlyweds and our daughter Rachel was just learning to walk. Elaine attended night college to obtain a master's degree in social work. I was a poor new lawyer, but I loved my wife and knew how much she wanted that desk. Every time we passed a storefront, she would stop to look at it. I saved every penny I could get my hands on. But when I went to buy it for our anniversary, it was no longer in the window. With a sinking heart, I entered the store and asked for the small desk that stood in the window. The girl behind the counter looked puzzled, but when she asked the manager, he said he was stationed in the back of the store. When he was delivered to our small apartment, Elaine was overjoyed. Over the years, I watched her sitting at that table and thought how lucky I was to have her as my wife. Love is a funny thing. I decided it was all about these little moments. My wife's joy over a little antique table, my daughter's first steps, moving into our first home, and my wife's pride in earning her master's degree. If you add all these moments together, you get what is called love. They opened the desk drawers and found a diary. I suppose I could leave the drawers unlocked, but then they might not notice their contents. Locking the drawers gave it significance, and I needed them to take the diary. However, hacking the table hurt me. Perhaps it reminded me that Elaine was truly lost to me. The diary had the desired effect. Its contents soon leaked out. The pressure on the district attorney increased. Now they had proof, and the public knew about the love plot. The unfaithful wife and her companion turned into Romeo and Juliet. 2nd of January, I can't do this, right? Jenny just laughs at my indecisiveness. What is wrong with you? Your husband left town. You come to his apartment and no one knows anything. It's still so simple. How can I meet Bruce again? I don't care what people say about him. He was always kind to me. What will I say if he finds out? Blame him for leaving you alone so often. He actually doesn't go away very often, and when we're together, well, it's a good marriage. Paul just makes me feel something I've never felt before. Like I said, Bruce won't find out, and if he does, just do what I did with my Bob. And what did you do? Do you remember the day we came here and he looked so upset? Yes, I remember. At some point he asked if he could lie down in the bedroom. He looked almost sick. Well, that's how he found out that I slept with Paul. And I told him everything, and that I still loved him. I told him there was nothing he could do about it, that a man like Paul knew how to treat women. I think he wanted to kill this man, but physically he couldn't do it. You're lucky he doesn't have a gun, I said. Moreover, I can't imagine Bruce seeing things the way Bob did. Somehow I think Bruce will do something, but Jenny assured me I was wrong. We discussed how much Bruce loved me and should have understood everything, just like Bob. I've seen Paul 6 times in the last 3 weeks. We were never alone, but I saw him here and there. He could be watching me or Bruce. My husband was at home and was very attentive. We made love almost every evening because I was very excited, but there was no use in lying to myself about it. I may have been in bed with my husband, but I was thinking about Paul. Paul gave me a note today. It contained the address, date, and time. I am sure that this is the address of his apartment, and the date is the day when Bruce will be in New York. I don't want to go, and yet I know that I will go. I tell myself, I'll go, just to ask him to stop bothering me. January 15th. Oh God, what have I done? I spent the afternoon at Paul's apartment. Everything started well. I told him that nothing could happen between us, that I couldn't betray my husband, but then he kissed me, and everything flew out of my head except how much I wanted him. He pulled me into his bedroom and began to sensually undress me. He unbuttoned my blouse and pulled it off my shoulders. Then he ran his hands down my arms. He pulled my hands behind my back and kissed me deeply. As his tongue entered my mouth, he deftly unclasped my bra and let it fall to the floor along with my blouse. Then he picked me up and carried me to his bed. There he took off the last remnants of my clothes. His lips burned my flesh. What power this man had over me. He was still fully dressed at the time, but in the blink of an eye he took off his clothes, and I saw his magnificent body. He had incredible stamina and recovered quickly. We made passionate love all afternoon and into the evening. I left with tears in my eyes, thinking that this would never happen again, but none of us believed that this was the end. Walking out his front door, I knew I would definitely return. Chloe's speech to the jury was much cooler than her usual speech, which is to say, it was good and almost certainly the work of a literary black. Her boss was sitting there with her. Prosecutor Silva Marks wasn't going to let her subordinate get all the glory, but she wasn't stupid enough to think about doing the job herself. I defended myself. Presiding Judge Bascom warned that a lawyer who defends himself has a fool for his client. I replied that this was better than having a fool as a lawyer. Bascom was going to do everything possible to ensure that justice prevailed in the form of my conviction. He will bend over backwards to help a lame prosecution, and in his jury instructions he will transform the concept of reasonable doubt into something more consistent with the concept of guilty until proven innocent. For my part, I was only worried about someone noticing that I had an ace up my sleeve and was just waiting for the moment to play it. I had the truth on my side, but they had a romantic Romeo and Juliet story. A police officer and my wife, a social worker, were lovers. I was the villain in this story, whether I was guilty or not. Life is not fair, and justice is rarely found in the courtroom. Sergeant McVeigh, did you open the trunk of the defendant's car? Chloe asked her first witness. Yes, the car immediately aroused my suspicions. It was an old brown Toyota Camry. It's not the kind of a car you'd expect to see in an expensive lawyer's car, but it's very discreet and has plenty of boot space. I see, Chloe said, looking at the jury with a smile that said, see how cunning the defendant is. What, if anything, did you find in the trunk? Chloe asked. It appeared to have been recently cleaned, but we were able to locate hairs and fibers that matched both Officer Paul Moreno and Elaine Gray. So their bodies could have been placed in the trunk? I protest. This is a speculative question, I said. No, the witness is an expert, and he is simply asked for his opinion. The challenge is overruled, and the witness can answer, Judge Bascom said. That's how things went. Sergeant McVeigh was pleased to explain to the jury how he believed I transported and disposed of the bodies of my wife and her lover. On cross-examination, I asked, Sergeant, if the bodies were transported in the Camry, then what happened to the bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby 500 GT? I don't quite understand what you mean. Machine Paula Moreno. Her nowhere. I don't know that, of course, McVeigh replied. But you know for sure that his car is missing, and this car is not one of those that has nothing special, I said, addressing the jury more than McVeigh. Yes, Paula's machine failed. I'm going back to the Camry. You broke in, but tell me why you didn't use the keys in the ignition. Perhaps we didn't notice them. Indeed. But didn't you use them to open the trunk? McVeigh looked stunned for a second, but before he could respond, Chloe rose to her feet, protesting. The question is controversial and involves facts that are not supported by evidence. Of course, she was convinced that there was no point in reporting the facts. She followed McVeigh to the stand with senior investigator Kim Eng. He told a story about how he tore off the carpet in the basement and found traces of blood under it. Were you able to identify this blood by group or DNA? Asked solemnly Chloe. No, she was too decomposed. There was a strong smell of bleach in the basement, which is why I suspected we would find traces of blood there. Bleach is often used to remove bloodstains. When the right of interrogation passed to me, I only had a few questions. Investigator, there was a laundry room in the basement, wasn't it? Yes. You expect to find bleach in the laundry room, don't you? Cannot say. I guess it depends on the personal preference of the person doing the laundry. The 7 women on the jury didn't quite agree with Mr. Eng, but now it was time for the real show, which began with reading my wife's diary. 16th of January. I feel guilty and in the clouds at the same time. I can't stop thinking about Paul, about his gorgeous body and how he makes me feel. And at the same time, I feel so guilty towards Bruce. For the first time, I want to believe all the terrible things people say about him. But I know it's not true. Bruce always showed his love for me, and I repaid him with the most terrible betrayal. Somehow I feel like my terrible sin is about to come to light, and Bruce, looking at me, will understand what I did to him, to us. The table I'm writing this on was a gift from Bruce. It was purchased at a time when we had little money. This is a real antique. I saw it in the window, but I knew there was no way we could afford it. I was partly to blame for our poverty. I really wanted to have a child, but we only got married recently and couldn't think about children yet. Bruce just started working. I was still in graduate school. Despite our poverty, I stopped taking birth control. It was supposed to be a mutual decision, but I took it upon myself. Bruce never judged me. He expressed nothing but joy about my pregnancy. I knew he was worried about our finances and wanted to wait until we were better off. Yet, even as we struggled like fish, he somehow found the means to buy me an extravagant gift. My loving husband of the last 15 years, whom I so easily betrayed. I hesitate between never seeing Paul again and running out the door and into the arms of my lover. When Bruce returns from his trip this evening, I'm sure he'll find out about this, and maybe that will put an end to it one way or another. I don't know what I'll tell him. I can't bear to hurt him. January 17th. Nothing happened last night. If Bruce knew anything or even suspected what I was doing while he was gone, he gave no sign. And yet, our communication looked somehow strange. It was as if some distance had arisen between us. Perhaps I am artificially creating exactly what I fear. Bruce acted and looked tired. For now, I'll have to wait and see. I left for work early so I wouldn't have to see Bruce in the bright light of the morning. I'd barely arrived at work when my cell phone rang. It was Paul. He wanted to talk, and we talked until I had to get to work. The conversation with him somehow lifted my spirits and gave me hope that everything would work out, that love will find a way, and I have to admit that what I feel for Paul is love. Perhaps not as eternal as what I had with Bruce, but a deep and passionate feeling that I had never experienced before. January 19th. I picked a time and went to what I said was a long lunch, but actually met Paul at his apartment. He works the shift from 4 to midnight. We had 2 heavenly hours together. At home, Bruce seemed unfazed, but I'm not sure it was all in my head. We haven't had sex since he got back from New York, but he'll be home this weekend, and I'm determined to make it up to him. 12th of February. I've spent the last month in turmoil. My romance with Paul seems to be escalating. We see each other at his house at least twice a week during the day, and also in the evenings when Bruce is out of town, which happens often these days. Paul says Bruce is involved with some very bad people. The FBI is very concerned because none of their surveillance attempts have worked. Bruce legally blocks their warrants and helps them acquire very sophisticated equipment to protect against wiretapping, what is prohibited but can be purchased with special permits. Paul hasn't said it, but I know part of his job is still keeping an eye on my husband. I guess I should be relieved that Paul almost always knows my husband's whereabouts. But the tension is growing. I found myself between 2 lovers. I love both of these men, and I see that they are enemies. I am trapped in this hopeless situation from which there is no way out. Bruce was the best husband, buying me little gifts for no reason, sending me flowers, and making love to me. However, I can't shake the feeling that he somehow knows what's going on behind his back. He doesn't show any signs that he knows, but after 15 years I can sense when he's worried and when something is bothering my husband. Forgive me, Mr. Gray, but I don't see a problem in admitting your wife's diary as evidence, Judge Bascom said. We were in his office arguing over the prosecution's proposal to introduce the diary as evidence. I see, and the concept of rumors doesn't bother you at all, I said. There was no doubt that Elaine's diary was an out-of-court statement that was accepted as truth. He falls under one of the exceptions to the rumor rule, she countered, Chloe. Is it true? Which one exactly? I demanded. A few, she answered, without putting anything specific into her argument. I had no intention of winning this argument. Chloe. She believed that she needed the diary to cement my sentence, and the judge was going to use it. The diary is in action. If I'm wrong, you can argue it in the appeal court, the judge said. On appeal, the prosecution will argue that admitting the diary was a harmless mistake. This would not be entirely correct, but what would it matter if I am guilty in truth? Everyone knew this, including the appeal court judges. Chloe asked a very attractive employee from her office to sit in the witness box to read my wife's diary. The girl was about 22 years old. She had dark brown hair styled in a straight, simple updo, deep brown eyes, and the most innocent look possible. She blushed so sweetly at the rougher parts of my wife's notes, and thereby deflected any judgment the jury might have felt about the depraved infidelity of the woman I loved, and to whom I had been faithful for 15 years. 16th of March. Rachel returned home for spring break. I haven't seen or heard from my daughter since Christmas. She seems very happy. I don't know exactly why she wanted to go to boarding school, but I suspect it had something to do with the rumors about Bruce. She loves her father, but there's no escaping what people say about him. This must be hard for a teenager. Since Rachel is at home, Paul and I can't meet at my place, and Paul thinks there might be people at his work who are suspicious of his relationship with me. It would be bad for his career if our affair became known while he was on the team investigating Bruce's case. Paul plans to ask for a transfer, wants me to leave Bruce. However, when faced with this solution, I realize that what Paul is suggesting is wrong. Moreover, what I'm doing to Paul is wrong. My novel is wrong on many levels. When I saw Rachel, I realized that first and foremost, I was her mother and Bruce's wife. Neither did anything worthy of the pain that running away with Paul would cause. The pain I will cause to my family is far greater than the pain I will feel from losing Paul. I think I'm coming to my senses. This passion that took possession of me clouded my senses. I need to come to my senses and do what I have to do to end things with Paul. I made up my mind. When I see Paul tomorrow, I'll put an end to this. I know it will hurt him, but he will get through it. I know for sure that he will not lack communication. Jenny is just biding her time. She is a young and beautiful woman with a husband who has no choice but to put up with her infatuation with Paul. A man like Bob can't do anything to a man like Paul. Everyone, as usual, believes that Bruce is not that kind of man at all. Would Bruce hurt Paul if he found out? I don't believe Bruce would ever hurt me. But could I be wrong? Horrible things people say about Bruce. They can't be true. I've known him all these years. I've loved him all these years, and I still doubt it. Paul is convinced that my husband may be dangerous and fears for my safety. I just can't bring myself to believe that Bruce would hurt anyone. When I look at Bruce, I see the dear, sweet man I married, a loving father to our daughter, a man who, throughout our years of marriage, always put Rachel and me first. When I see Paul tomorrow, I have to break up with him. It will hurt, but I have to do the right thing. I called Jenny and said that the day after tomorrow, she might want to call Paul and console him. The pretty and young paralegal finished reading the last entry in my wife's diary. The prosecution hoped to portray me as a cruel, evil husband trying to come between lovers, but I don't think Elaine's diary was like that. In the end, my wife chose her home over the womanizer who was stalking her. Paul Moreno was a home wrecker. He knew Elaine was happily married, but he still pursued her. Perhaps he completely believed all the vile stories that law enforcement officers told about me. Perhaps he was trying to save the woman he fell in love with. In reality, the lovers waited too long and met a terrible fate. There are a lot of ifs in a situation like this. If Elaine had confessed to me, or if they had ended the relationship sooner, who knows what might have happened. This was not my immediate problem. The problem was saving my neck. After reading the diary, the jury was ready to convict, and everyone in the courtroom knew it. I had a long list of witnesses, but only one mattered. Jake Trumbull spoke in court. On my list of witnesses, he seemed like an ordinary witness. His expert report consisted of 500 pages of nonsense with a mention of video on page 439. We started with his credentials: a degree in electrical engineering from the Rochester Institute of Technology, service in Army intelligence, and then 20 years in the FBI. Not a bad resume. What I missed was that after working for the FBI, he became employed by the very criminal organizations he was prosecuting on behalf of the government. It has proven invaluable to me and others in the fight against government surveillance. Mr. Trumbull, have you done any work for me in the past? Yes, many times. The last time you worked for me, what did you do? I have installed a complete surveillance system covering your home and your office, both inside and outside. We call it the black cover, because it is designed to reveal dirty deeds. What do you mean by dirty deeds? As usual, unauthorized entry to install listening devices or plant evidence. And have you discovered any dirty dealings? Yes, my staff and I watched as Sergeant McVeigh took the keys to a brown Camry and opened the trunk. Then he emptied the material from the bag into the trunk. A little later, he returned with other officers and broke open the trunk with a crowbar. The officers then began collecting so-called trace samples from the trunk. Shocked muttering came from the courtroom. Trumbull was on a roll and offered to watch the video he had collected. We included her in evidence despite the prosecution's objections. Trumbull went on to talk about the planted blood that investigator Eng discovered. Needless to say, the prosecution's case fell apart. Without forensic testing, they didn't even have evidence that a crime had been committed. All they had was a missing pair of lovers, a missing gun, and a car that no one could find. At the not guilty verdict, my daughter Rachel hugged me. That she never believed I killed her mother mattered. Many others thought I had gotten away with murder. It is noteworthy that no action was taken against the officers who tried to frame me. Ultimately, they saved my life by giving the prosecution a case for trial. A long, dry summer has turned Shohari into a muddy patch. It also revealed a blue Ford Mustang hidden in the deepest part of its riverbed. The bodies were still in the car. They must have been trapped in the frame of the car even as the flooding stream first carried the car away and then let it sink into the deep, rushing waters. They found Elaine's purse containing the GPS device I left in the car, along with what was left of my wife's body. She was right. I was more than suspicious. I collected evidence of her infidelity. I loved her, and she hurt me deeply. As far as I was concerned, Paul Moreno was a snake out to destroy a good marriage. It broke my heart, but I was planning a divorce, not a murder. However, the police would never believe it. My wife and her lover were dead. Even if I was a saint, they would still hold me responsible. But I was far from a saint. Elaine lay beneath her lover. It was obvious that neither of them was fully clothed at the time of death. An autopsy revealed that they had both been shot, but it turned out that the intended victim was Paul Moreno. The bullets passed through his body and hit Elaine. This double murder was the result of such a powerful weapon. A Smith & Wesson .44 was found on the floor of the Mustang. It was my gun, the same one that disappeared. If the police and prosecutor had just waited, they wouldn't have had to plant evidence. The diary forced them to act. It was the story of lovers separated by a cruel and dishonest lawyer husband that forced the prosecutor to act prematurely. Public opinion pushed the police towards the usual litigiousness. I was set up, but skill and luck saved me. As a lawyer, I was proud of my work, while law enforcement lamented the system being manipulated by unscrupulous lawyers. Lottie put down her beer and gave me a winning smile. Then she put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed it as a sign of support. She didn't need to say that she supported me, she showed it herself. We were at Chambers, a bar in town. Lottie changed jobs, and I followed her out of loyalty. Overall, Chambers was a much nicer place for me to have a drink than Falcon's Rest. The police would never forgive me for beating them, and the visitors here felt a certain sympathy for the loser. Poor downtrodden lawyer with a ruined reputation. This opinion was completely wrong. The clients I needed to attract viewed my acquittal on a charge of which I was so obviously guilty as the ultimate testament to my skill as a lawyer. As a result of all this seemingly negative publicity, I was forced to increase my hourly rate and hire a pretty young employee to cope with the increased demand. Without being tainted by this strange case, I looked like an anti-hero. Poor Chloe, on the other hand, was forced to leave the prosecutor's office, becoming a scapegoat for failure. My drinking buddy drank half of his Sam Adams in one gulp. Relax, Bob. There's no rush. I don't have a wife at home, and yours is not worth coming home, I said. Bob frowned slightly. I think he finally realized that some women, regardless of their physical attractiveness, are not worth bothering with, and his Jenny certainly fell into that category. Sorry about, he began, but clearly couldn't bring himself to continue. Please, I said. I didn't ask you for an apology. Of course, you must understand that, in these circumstances, this does not make sense. But I didn't want Elaine to get hurt, he pleaded. Of course not. It was a pure coincidence. A person like you is not familiar with weapons. You couldn't have known that the bullets would go through Officer Moreno's body and into the woman he was having sex with, I countered. This was all that poor Bob needed. Exactly. His seats were positioned so that they lowered down like a bed, You couldn't even see who was underneath him, and I was so upset. I was beside myself after Jenny said she would date him again. That's right, you were kind of unconscious, only vaguely aware of what you were doing, but tell me, did you wipe my gun for fingerprints before you planted it? I asked. Maybe yes. I didn't think well. I stole it earlier, and my intention was to warn him. It was your gun, because I knew you kept it in your bedroom for protection. Elaine was very happy to let me lie down when I said I wasn't feeling well. It was easy to find your gun. You didn't hide it. I think a man like you needs such protection. Actually, it was a gift from a client. I put it in the bedroom to protect Elaine on the nights I wasn't home. He nodded solemnly, and I wondered if he caught the irony of the situation. She told me that she would meet with him again. Exactly. Paul will need some friendly reassurance, she said. I couldn't just do nothing. I went to his house to warn him that I would not tolerate this. His car was gone. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. I'm afraid I came to the wrong conclusion. A reasonable mistake under the circumstances, I intervened. I knew where he took his mistresses in that disgusting car of his. It had already started to rain, and it was very dark when I reached the ring road leading to the stream. I stopped on the road and walked down to the stream. On a good night, the moon floods the place with light, but the weather has turned bad. They were on the passenger side, but the driver's side window was partially rolled down. I heard them laughing, and then she moaned in a way that shocked me to the core. I didn't understand what I was doing. I shot without thinking, and then the gun seemed to fall out of my hand, or maybe I threw it. I didn't find out that Elaine was in the car until much later. I am so sorry. Will you tell the police about this? He asked, with a worried look. I shrugged. Why, it's definitely not my place to judge you. I am many things, but I am not a hypocrite. But I killed your wife, he said. Yes, but only by mistake. I don't know how the car ended up in the stream. I expected the car to be found immediately, but when it wasn't found, people started blaming you. Naturally, without corpses and weapons, they could not prove my guilt, but the GPS, which I put in my wife's purse, told me where she was. I decided that due to rising water, the car first fell into a flooded creek and then sank when it filled with water. It was only a matter of time. The car, the bodies, or both. Since my gun was missing, I had a good suspicion as to how the lovers died and who would be to blame. I regret this and the fact that many still consider you guilty. You have to turn me in, Bob said in a quiet, sad whisper. What can I say? We are not responsible for what people think, and I certainly cannot counter an attractive lie with an unpleasant truth. No, you are completely safe on my side, I said. Then why did you invite me here? To give you this, I said, taking a document from my jacket pocket. What is this? He asked. My account, of course. I put up a damn good kill defense. But you defended yourself, he said. Whose fault was it? I've wasted time and expense, and the responsible party must pay. I might add that I did a damn good job. You should be pleased. That's a lot of money, he said. The defense was just good, I objected. Do you accept American Express? Of course. I think Bob was relieved that I would keep his secret, but as I said, I'm in no position to judge. We live in a society where the presumption of innocence has been replaced by a presumption of guilt. In such an unjust world, a person must live by his own mind. Lottie brought me another Boston lager as Bob was leaving. Are you okay? She asked with genuine concern in her voice. Yes, in the end, everything works out for the better. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.